Hi, this is Dr. Tom Murray. I'm delighted to bring you another Straight Talk with Sexperts. In this episode, I talk with Greensboro-based Imago relationship therapist Ann Erickson about a topic that a lot of couples know all too well: problems with communicating. Perhaps you've had the thought that communication between you and your partner sucks, leaving you feeling misunderstood and unloved. More, with COVID-19 requiring constant contact, you've likely noticed your relationship has become more stressed. We know that when stress goes up, your effectiveness as a communicator goes down. It's quite predictable, so much so that poor communication is a common reason that people seek a couples therapist. Couples say, "We don't communicate well. He doesn't listen to me. She gives me the silent treatment." Anne and I cover a lot of ground in this episode, and she guides us through a three-step process using the Imago method for immediately improving the quality of your communication. Stay tuned, hit the like button down below, and don't forget to subscribe to be alerted to new videos when they're posted. Now, for the interview.
There's mystery surrounding couples counseling. People are a little afraid of it. And we are living through just an unprecedented level of stress right now. Whether you're cooped up with your partner at home, or one of you has an essential job and has to be outside of the home, or both of you, through the roof. So
Yeah.
relationships are being strained.
Exactly. And for a variety of reasons, the stress is coming in for multiple from multiple directions. Particularly for families that are homeschooling.
Ugh. Yeah.
I mean, what stress, and then even is there even enough work for everybody? For the day, to manage careers. It's just a strange time.
It really is too much. And especially, I'm glad you mentioned the homeschooling, because I have friends who have chosen to homeschool, and that's one thing. But so many parents now, they didn't choose this. They didn't sign up for this. And the expectations that you put on yourself, it's too much to juggle. Yeah. So you're right.
And I think with that are couples who are just spending all day long with each other. And I posted on Facebook earlier today, do you have libido or libidon't?
Yeah, you might see everything on that spectrum nowadays. And yeah, I posted something the other day about how those little things that irritate us about our partner, they might just be infuriating right now, like
Right.
nails on a chalkboard. And so it's really hard to connect, and that tension builds. Irritated with your partner all the time, usually, you're not going to want to jump into bed with them.
Yeah, right.
It's not sexy.
Those porcupine quills are already, of all the little micro transgressions that have occurred throughout the day, and there's not a desire.
Right, exactly. And when we're so stressed, there's a phrase that's useful. I think it's anxiety is the antithesis of arousal. So, our bodies, our fight or flight is in action just 20 right now. And so we can't experience arousal unless our nervous system is relaxed. And so now more than ever, to get out of that state of anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it sounds like you're hearing people talk about this heightened anxiety.
Yeah, what I'm seeing kind of across the board in my practice is, after the initial sort of novelty of all this wore off, in the first couple of weeks, people were kind of numb about it. They're like, I don't really feel anything about it. It's fine. Now I'm seeing an increase in symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety. It's all kind of exacerbated.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, as it drags on, that irritability might increase for a lot of people, and for yet others, we there may be a natural resetting of a new normal sets in, and
Yep.
and so you have that whole spectrum there.
Yeah, that's so right, Tom. And within a couple, you usually see each person, each individual react to this differently. Somebody might be in a state of anxiety or adjusting to this new normal, and the
Mm.
other partner might be more lethargic, depressed, and now that creates tension too. Um, yeah, so it's tough. But, the great thing in the work we do is that we can offer people hope.
Yes. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I know that a particular interest of yours is the work of Harville Hendricks and Imago Therapy. And I learned about Imago back in the late 90s when I was in graduate school. And so my understanding of it is uh, 20 years old. And I'm not, I'm very curious to hear how things may have changed over the past couple decades.
Mhm.
What, Imago may not be familiar to a lot of people. What's important for people to know about Imago therapy and how it helps to frame couples' experience and chart a path forward for couples that may be in distress?
Yeah. So when Dr. Harville Hendricks and his wife, Dr. Helen LaKelly Hunt, there's a really famous book they wrote. It's called Getting the Love You Want.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody listening right now, if for whatever reason you can't get into couples counseling or don't have time or whatever, that book is a wonderful resource, Getting the Love You Want. And there were a number of years there where that was really popular, and he was on Oprah multiple times. He was like one of her favorite things. Um, when I learned about Imago, I was living in Washington, D.C. It was 2011. I was in individual therapy, and my husband and I had young kids. And I told my therapist, a theme that kept coming up for me in my individual therapy was, my husband and I, we're just drowning here in being parents of young kids. We're
Mm-hmm.
disconnected in every
Mm-hmm.
way. So she handed me a brochure. She said, Anne, go to this Get in the Love You Want weekend workshop. And I kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, hey, whatever. So I'm just such a skeptic. So my husband and I went to that weekend, and about halfway through it, I turned to him and I said, if I got trained in Imago relationship therapy, I could work with couples. And like many therapists, we are not trained in couples therapy in graduate school. Like, we don't graduate kind of equipped with those skills. And I never thought I would want to work with couples because it just felt scary.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but the thing that people should know about what distinguishes Imago relationship therapy is the focus is on the connection between the partners. You're not coming into my office kind of hashing out who's right about something. Um, and the way it looks in my office is you and your partner face each other. You sit in chairs facing each other, and then between you and facilitate the connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's really trying to get underneath, okay, what's going on under all this arguing? What are we really trying to say to each other, and how can we hear each other? Because so often when some of our partners talking to us, we're thinking about what we're going to say. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, kind of defending, getting ready for the counter defense.
Yes. Yeah. And there's another quote, I can't remember who said it, but being heard is so close to being loved that it's indistinguishable.
Yeah.
And that is just so true. We all just yearn to be heard.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's
To be
simple. Yeah.
seen. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
That really resonates with me, because I think that um, people don't make the mistake. There's no mistake around in the knowing that you've been accepted. That doesn't confuse people, right? It's like I can feel when I'm in the space of someone who accepts me just as I am. And
Yes.
that feels like love.
Right. And
Yeah.
and you can hardly put words to it. You just feel it in that space.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you talked about that space because in any relationship, there's you, there's me, there's a space that exists between us.
Mm.
And as we grow up and we're in relationship with others, we don't even think about that third part. There's a co-created space between you and me. Even here in this interview, even though we're not in the same room, you can feel the space
Yeah.
that exists, and you usually can put a word to it that kind of names how it feels.
Yes. Yeah.
And so Imago kind of brings awareness, helps the couple recognize, what does the space feel like between us right now? What am I putting into the space to impact that?
Yes. Yes. So if someone is in session with you and you're sitting between them,
Yeah.
does that then translate into being a facilitator, being an interpreter, all the above? How does it show up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to clarify, because I just realized it's not very clear. When I'm sitting with a couple, we kind of create a triangle shape. So I'm not like in between. I'm not blocking their view of each other, but yeah. So they're facing each other. I'm kind of outside that dyad between them. And the great thing is I guide the couple in something we call the intentional Imago dialogue. And I'll say more about that in a minute. But what's so scary to people about coming to couples counseling, they think that they're going to come in, the therapist is going to be a referee, and one of them's going to be the winner and one of them's going to be the loser.
Right.
So often the partner that's kind of reluctantly coming to couples counseling, they feel like, what? I'm going to go in there and the therapist is going to tell me why I'm wrong. And, unfortunately, some therapists, it does go that way in their office because they might not have training in couples therapy, but they offer it. So I try to make the environment very safe, welcoming, calm, and that we're not here to figure out who's right or wrong. That when I'm sitting there, I'm not this partner's therapist or this partner's therapist. I'm the therapist for the space in between. I'm the therapist for the relationship.
Right.
And when I'm there, each person makes perfect sense to me. I mean, they just do.
Yeah.
And I kind of envision myself, I don't know if you can see this, but holding my arms around both. It kind of created this invisible kind of cocoon.
Yeah. Container.
Yeah. I forgot what your question was.
Well, just that facilitator versus, or not versus, but it sounds like in your description that you're facilitating a conversation. It sounds like using a particular sequence of steps,
yes.
and it may also, well, in Imago, do you do much interpreting, speaking for the client when they have difficulty with finding words? Is that part of the process?
Yeah, such a great question, Tom. So I would say there's not much interpreting, but just kind of the very quick tutorial on the 3 components of the dialogue, it's mirroring, validating, and empathizing. Mm-hmm. And those things are very simple when you see them on paper. Like if you get that book, Getting the Love You Want, and see them described, you're like, oh, big deal. Like anybody can do that. And in fact, they're simple, but they're incredibly challenging and they're incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. And so mirroring, maybe you and I can, let's just demo it real quick.
Okay, sounds great.
So I'm going to ask you a question and then I'll mirror it.
Yeah.
And you tell me how that feels for you. Okay. So Tom, what has it been like for you working during this pandemic crisis? What has that felt like for you?
It's been a real transition, of course, in that I miss having the connection with clients in the actual office. There is an energetic quality there that I feed off of, and miss that, and there's some anxiety that I feel that maybe am I missing something that isn't accessible to me because of the medium that we're using.
Mhm.
So that's uh, a, a a big, just kind of professionally, that's uh, an area of anxiety that I have,
Mhm.
and grief. I would say there's some grief in not having that time with them too.
Yeah. So what it's been like for you working during this pandemic, it's been a big transition because you really miss being in the office with clients and kind of feeling that energy that's in the room. And you're also a little scared that you might be missing something in the video format that maybe you would catch in the office. And along with all this, there's definitely some grief that you miss being with them in person. And did I get all that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in fact, I could say that even just listening to you reflect that back or mirror that back, I can notice that I'm just breathing even a little bit more easily.
Yeah. So even hearing me say that back to you, you're breathing a little more easily. And I'm imagining you're feeling really seen and heard.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Especially from someone who I feel like gets it,
Yes.
right?
Especially from somebody who because I do the same work.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So that's a small example of the couples how to do that. There's two roles there. There's the sender and the receiver. So just there, you were the sender and I was receiving. Um, each of those has a special responsibility. The sender's responsibility is to be open, to allow the receiver to step into your world, for you to be vulnerable. The receiver is to be willing to cross that bridge into the other person's world. Kind of, I put my stuff behind me and I'm like, you know what? I'm completely here for Tom right now. I'm going to cross the bridge into his world.
Mhm.
Right. Because even though I do the same work, maybe I feel differently or, like I'm being curious without judgment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so when a couple's sitting together and they're making eye contact and they're intentionally listening, they will also notice that change in their body, kind of a softness comes over you. Um, you said that you could breathe a little more easily. And I will say, some people can be they're reluctant to do the mirroring. It's so different, it's so new, and it can feel mechanical at first.
Right.
It's so vulnerable that when people try it for the first time, they kind of, okay, see how this feels to you. Okay, Tom, so you said that you really miss being in the office with people and there's some grief there, but like it's mechanical and it feels
Yeah, it's kind of like going down the checklist. Okay, this is what was said.
right.
This was what was said. This was what was said.
Yeah, and it can feel really icky for
Yeah.
the sender. However, there's no right or wrong. We're learning, and so it's new, right? Like when I first tried it with my husband, I said it very mechanically. I'm like, what the
Yeah.
hell is this? I don't know how to do this.
Right.
So it just takes practice,
And
and
it
also,
takes and
yeah,
and I also hear it takes a willingness to have a shift right? Because I think so many people, when they are having or initiating these kinds of conversations, they bring into it a defensiveness of fear that if I validate the other person's experience, I lose validity in my own.
That is right on. That's perfect the way you said that, because yeah, it can be really threatening. If I leave my world that I know everything about and I try to see what you're about, does that just negate everything I'm thinking? So I'm so glad you brought that up, because mirroring, the reason it can be challenging sometimes is sometimes our partner says things we don't want to mirror. We don't want to hear it.
Yeah, right.
It makes us feel defensive.
Yeah.
So the really important thing to remember is that you are listening with intent. It does not mean that you're agreeing.
Yeah.
You're just crossing over to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
And that also takes a lot of practice. So many of us, we grew up maybe not having the healthiest examples of how to be in relationship with somebody, because our parents never learned the tools. Their parents never had the tools. So as kids, we developed all these incredibly wise defense mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
So then when we feel threatened by our partner, we go right to those mechanisms. Some of us leave, we go silent. Some of us yell, our energy gets big. So you can see where mirroring and crossing over takes a lot of courage.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a suspension of an agenda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No agenda. You're not trying to change their minds. You're not trying to convince them of your point.
Right.
And that really, it can be a relief for the receiver to be like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I'm just being present.
Right. Yeah. So mirroring, you talked about mirroring, and then the next stage is?
Yeah. So the next stage is called validation. And I'll just stay with the example that you, well, let's continue with this. Tell me more about that feeling of grief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I know it's something that we don't like to admit as therapists, but I get a lot of my own emotional needs met from the work that I do. Right. And I love my clients. Like, I genuinely have love for my clients, and I there's a loss in that kind of interaction, right?
Yeah.
There's a we quality, I think, again, from my experience, there's a we quality, and I'm changed by my clients too, right? At least I hope that I'm open to that possibility of being changed by them. And so there is that grief of either loss or anticipated loss,
Mm-hmm.
right? Anticipatory grief, maybe, I don't know,
Yes.
but that's what's coming up for me.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to mirror a little bit, Tom, and I'm going to move into the validation. And the thing about mirroring and validating, it's not about getting it right on the first try, getting an A+ or an F in those doing those things. It's about trying to get you, trying to hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I'm going to guess at some things based on what I heard, and then I'm going to check in with you about that guess. Okay. So what I'm hearing you say is the grief you feel is because you get a lot of your own emotional needs met through the deep meaning of the work that you do. And also when the client is in that office with you, there is something that's co-created in that relationship that's special, and that you feel a genuine love for your clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes sense to me. This is the validation part. You say that makes sense to me, and the part that makes sense is. Now that's really hard because you're saying, okay, Tom, you make sense to me. I'm not saying, Tom, I agree with you.
Right.
See how hard this can be in the couple section.
Yeah.
um, so that makes sense to me. And that makes sense is it can also take a moment for the receiver to kind of process, and that's okay too. So the part that makes sense to me about that grief is you have such a passion for your work and you enjoy it and you genuinely are so engaged in that relationship with the clients that there's a sadness that now that's relegated to a screen.
Yeah.
So did I get that? Is that how it feels, or did I miss something?
No, that's exactly it. You know, uh, there's this two-dimensional image that I have, right? Uh, and we are three-dimensional people. And is there a loss, right? But at the same time, you know, what just came to me was there's a deep gratitude that we have this technology, because I think, you know, as therapists, you know, 10 years ago or more, um, we wouldn't, we would be relegated to the phone, if even that. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so there's also a deep gratitude that we can maintain these relationships, that I can maintain these relationships.
Yeah. So deep gratitude that we have the technology to continue the work, and that lives right alongside the grief, that it's
Yes.
not the way we would want it to be.
Right.
I think our clients are experiencing those same emotions at the same time. I've been amazed how couples counseling has translated beautifully to this format, and I just did not think it would. So that's one thing that anybody who's listening to this, if you're thinking about couples counseling, you're not sure how teletherapy will be, I have found that my couples really feel very comfortable because they're in their own environment.
Sometimes in their own bed.
Sometimes, I haven't had that yet. Maybe I have to suggest that. Just get real comfortable.
Yeah.
But I've been really pleased with that, that they still get all the benefits. And I want to check in with you. The mirroring plus the validation, what did you notice about your experience of those two together?
That it was free of judgment about even having said things that might raise some eyebrows within the profession, right? I remember years ago, I was asked to do a guest lecture at one of the local universities' counseling programs, and I shared, you know, my experience with my clients, and I've even said that I've told clients that I loved them, because if I were the only person in that person's life that tells them that they're loved, then I want to be that person. Well, it got back to me through one of my interns that the supervising professor made it very clear that you should never tell your clients that you love them. And so I recognize that there's these different views within the profession, that being transparent, even within this medium, you know, I you know, am I going to be judged because, you know, for what is true for me, right? And so in the validation phase, I didn't feel that. It felt like I could put it out there, even though there was a little anxiety behind it. I could put it out there, and that it was made sense.
Yes. So it would be received without judgment, received with some curiosity. I am so glad you touched on that, Tom, because I've found in my journey over the years in my career, I used to be extremely rigid about what we call the therapeutic frame, which is, what creates safety with clients. And I used to be so rigid, like never touch a client, never, like all these like black and white things. And and I laugh with one of my mentors now because she and I would have debates about it. And my turning point with that was a client reached to hug me at the end of a difficult session. And I thought, if I do not return this hug, I am doing harm.
Yes.
And that was a watershed, just an amazing moment for me. And I've come to think if I don't have some kind of love for every client that walks through the door, I cannot work with them in an effective way, in a healthy way.
Yeah.
But the word love is almost taboo in the field of mental health. And so I really appreciate the courage that it took for you to say that in spite of the anxiety. Yeah. And opinions run the gamut on that. There may be some therapists who watch this and say, oh, I would never say that. Mm-hmm. But and that's okay. That's the way they operate.
Right.
And I'll tell you a funny story real quick. I was on teletherapy, and at the end of it had been such a hard session, but we have great rapport. And okay, I'll see y'all next time. And I was like, love y'all. And I would never do that in the office, Tom. And I was like, what did I say? And so now it has become this wonderful inside joke. We had such a difficult session recently. Yeah. And at the end of the session, it's a joke now. I was like, see you next time. Love y'all. And they say, we love you too. And,
Yeah. And I think that we get to have such a privileged place in their lives. I remember one time a client said, when I shared with the client, well, I care a lot about you. And the client said, you get paid to care for me. And I said, let's apply the brakes. Mm-hmm. I get paid for my time and my expertise. The caring is free.
Yes.
And I'm remembering that moment now, and it's so it's so important that it be freely given.
Yes.
Right. That it be freely given. The word love comes from the Old English word lief, L-I-E-F, which turned into leave. I give you leave. And then it transitioned into I give, love, which leave meant to, I give you leave to go on as you are, right? To love someone is to love them as they are, to see them on their own journey.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's loving our clients is just accepting them as they are. So when if someone says, I would never say to my client that I love them. So are you saying that you would never accept your client as they are?
That's a beautiful, description of the origin of the word, because that's exactly what we're doing. And I want to validate all the people out there who are watching who are clients, because it's such a unique relationship between the client and the therapist. So and true. Sometimes clients think, oh my God, I'm the only one who's feeling this. I'm so weird. It's normal for you to have a deep attachment to your therapist. And I'm laughing as you told that anecdote, because years ago with my therapist, you push and push to see, when is the therapist going to get fed? When am I going to be abandoned? When am I going to be too much? So I said to my therapist, you're only caring because I'm paying you to care. And she said, much like you did, she said, well, Anne, I don't think you can pay somebody to care. It's true. You can't make somebody care. So
you can't. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And you can, no, I think, just as I know we're kind of moving off the topic briefly about Imago, but it doesn't take very long to know when you've have a connection with a therapist. And I'm not one of those believers. Some people like have these concepts of transference and countertransference, where if you develop feelings about your client or your therapist, during that first session, that it's like, I can't work with this person. This idea of working it out with this therapist, that makes no sense to me, because I think people as humans who are designed for connection, we're designed for connection, that we can know minutes whether there's going to be a fit. And I'm all about people trying on therapists and trying to find that fit, because there are some therapists who are really great at working with a particular type of client, and there are other therapists who are great at really connecting with a variety of types of clients. And not one is not better than the other, but it certainly is what's best for you as a client.
That's so important, Tom, because every therapist is so different. I'm not going to be the perfect therapist for everybody who walks through my door.
Right.
And so clients should also know that, if they come to me for a session, it doesn't feel like a fit for them, my feelings are not going to be hurt. And in fact, I will go out of my way. If you say it's not a good fit, I'll be like, let me brainstorm and think of somebody who might be good for you.
Yes.
Because we don't have good ways in our culture to find a therapist. You've got Psychology Today is a great resource, but clients are kind of at a loss, and it can be a barrier to getting therapy because they don't know where to start. So I think it's really important for us, if it's not a fit, to say, you know what, here's a few more names.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
So I don't want to move on from Imago without talking about the third step, because we've gone through mirroring and validation.
Yes.
And so what would be the third?
So I just want to check, what's our time, Tom?
It's 10:38.
Okay. So the last step is empathy. And that is simply saying, after you mirror and validate, is saying, I imagine you must feel. And you say a word or two, a feeling word. And then you check in with the person and say, is that how you feel? If you're wrong, that's totally fine. We have a lot of trouble naming our feelings. And sometimes it helps for your partner just to hear a couple of words that they can say, actually, that's not quite it, but I think this might be. So the important thing to remember about the empathy part is when you say a feeling word, one word. So if something is a phrase, that's not a feeling. So let me try. Okay, so Tom, given all that about the transition and the grief, but also the gratitude, I imagine that you're feeling it's hard, so
hard. Yeah. I'm trying to think of a word, and it's hard.
So couples should know this. I love doing this demo with you live, because couples should know, if your partner has trouble coming up with words, it doesn't mean they're not. It just means it's hard.
It's hard.
So I imagine, yeah.
Well, just the and some of us, particularly males, are not domesticated to develop a list of feeling words.
Yes.
And so I've found it helpful to just have a feeling word list. And people can, when they see the word, they can recognize it and see it as, oh, this is it right here. but it's hard for them to organically just come up with the word. So
Yes.
how might it be helpful to use a feeling word list even when they're just at home, pulling that out?
Yep, it really could be. And when so many of us, you're so right about men, you're just not allowed to feel anything except anger in our culture.
Right.
And all of us, sometimes we grow up in homes where the way to survive and fit into that family is to not talk about feelings. And so that's what you do. You just don't talk about it. So I'm going to throw something out right now, and I'll tell you, as somebody who my identity is based on being right and being an achiever, I'm having anxiety come up right now because I can't think of a word. So when you're engaged in this, you can have that observing voice like, God, Ann, you're so stupid. Like, why can't you? Right?
Yeah.
So I'm having to I'm telling that voice, like, get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm guessing, Tom, that you might be feeling sad. And then I say, is that how you're feeling? And you might say, well, sort of, or no. So is that how you feel?
Also as an over-controlled person, I'm not, sadness is not a feeling that I often have. That I often experience, I should say. Maybe this is too heady. The word that comes to my mind is just mixed feelings. Or, I don't know if that it's just you see, interesting. I hadn't realized that it's to reduce down to a single word, because that would be a challenge even for me, right? And so I can your description of having anxiety about the challenge of coming up with the word yourself makes perfect sense to me, because there is it sounds like it would be easier if the feelings were pretty consistent, but as soon as you have kind of this multiplicity, right, that may, was it Emerson? Whitman, I think, said, do I contradict myself? Very well. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes.
Yes.
That's if I could sum that up into a single word, that's what I would offer, right? Is that there's just a multitude of feelings.
Yeah. And I think part of this journey when you're in couples counseling is to acknowledge that many different feelings can coexist together. And it doesn't have to be either or. So I want to take another guess because I've had a couple of words come to me. Tom, I'm guessing that you might feel wistful and grateful. Do those seem to fit?
Yes.
Is that how you feel?
Yes. Yeah, that resonates with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So wistful and grateful seems to fit.
Yes. Yeah.
With how you're feeling. Yeah. So I want to check in with you now that you've been through all three steps of mirroring, validation, and empathy. What are you noticing kind of in the space between us? Like, what word would you use to describe the co-created space between us right now?
If there's a connection, openness, there's almost a leaning in, like I'm desiring to return the favor, if you will, right?
Yes.
To hear from your perspective, what your perspective is.
Yeah. And isn't that amazing? Even though we're not even in the same room, we're both feeling in that space connection, openness, and you're also feeling, hey, Ann, I want to give this gift to you because it felt really good.
Yes.
So you can see you can see how powerful this is when two partners get in the room together and the defenses can come down. You and I also want this, that Tom and I, we are not partners, we're colleagues and friends. So the space between us is not nearly as charged and fraught with history or with vulnerability, all that kind of stuff. So Tom and I were able to do this very seamlessly, and we made it look pretty easy. But this can take many sessions. It's hard and it is vulnerable. So we usually say to clients, look, give this at least 12 sessions. It's going to take at least that long to really establish this, to learn this new way of talking and listening. And I really want to fit in two important things before we end. Yeah. We have about 10 minutes or so.
We have maybe about 5. Yeah.
Okay. So really quick. A really integral part of Imago is expressing appreciations. Mm. And this is a perfect way to end, Tom. So I would usually open the session with sharing appreciations with each other. And usually I'll ask each partners to say 2 or 3. So what you're going to do, we're just going to do 1 for each other to model. Okay. So I'm going to give you the sentence stem. That's what we call it. And I'm going to go, so Anne, one thing I appreciate about you is.
And one thing I appreciate about you is your willingness and eagerness to participate in this conversation with me and to really offer up to our viewers and listeners a way of connecting with their partners during this stressful time. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So one thing you appreciate about me is my willingness and openness to just engage in this conversation and help people learn how they can connect with their partners during this hard time.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you. So one thing I appreciate about you, Tom, is just your authenticity and your willingness to engage and even to name out loud the moments of anxiety that you felt. Because I think that's so validating for our clients to hear.
So
thank you. Yeah.
So Anne, what you appreciate about me is my authenticity and willingness to expose my anxiety around vulnerable things that I might be experiencing.
Yeah, that's right. So that if anybody takes anything from this session today, this talk, please run to your important person right now and tell them one thing you appreciate about them.
Yes.
Do that back and forth once a day. And then another thing is a 1-minute hug, which will feel like an eternity. But 1-minute hug, set the timer, full body, don't talk, don't move. And that releases powerful feel-good chemicals in your brain and helps regulate your nervous system. Last thing, Tom, we did not get to talk about sex.
I know. We'll have to do another one.
I'm so sad. I'll just say, in couples counseling, you really want to find a therapist who can integrate relationship work with addressing your sexual relationship. Because early on in this field, we used to think, you know what? Fix the relationship and the sex will follow. Right. And then we thought, fix the sex and the relationship will follow. But I really try to, it's hard to talk about for couples, but I try to in the first session or two say, okay, with all this going on, how is it impacting your sexual relationship? It's all intertwined.
It's so true. It is so true. Yeah. So I hope that means that we'll have another one of these conversations and talk about the fun topic of sex. So, Anne, how can people learn more about you, contact you if they're interested?
Yes, thanks. So you can go to my website at newgardencounseling.com, or you can email me at ann@newgardencounseling.com. I'm really responsive. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I know how scary it is to think about couples counseling. So I hope this is just taking away some of the mystery.
Yes, yes. And it's been such a joy to have you here with us today and to expose again our audience to Imago. So thank you so much. And if you like this video, please be sure to like the page, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye, Tom.
Bye.